The Bibites is not a game, or at least not completely. It's a simulation built from lines of code, interacting systems, and information that stands as a proof that life is not solely bound to the physical world, a form of life that thrives inside the machine. Bibites have a body that can act in the world, organs that allow them to digest food, store energy, reproduce, or communicate, genes that influence their physical attributes, and brains that are free to evolve to produce complex behaviors better suited for their environment. Environments that can be configured into an almost infinite diversity of ecosystems. With more than 100,000 people that have hosted a Bibit ecosystem on their computer, an incredible diversity of adaptations has been observed by the community. Some are simple herbivores that lazily search for food and graze on the large plants that grow around them. Others are enormous whale-like creatures, perfectly adapted for filter feeding, swooping into food clusters with no regard for others. Some are small, with strong jaws that allow them to grab onto others and spend their whole life feeding from the blood of their victims as parasites. Scavengers have evolved from herbivores, their brain developing and genes shifting over generations to eventually take advantage of the energy-dense carcasses of other less fortunate Bibites. And of course, predators, distant relatives of the species they share assimilation with, eventually display complex hunting behaviors used to catch and feed on their herbivore cousins. And although the simulation still has a long way to go, being continuously improved and worked on, life, combined with evolution through natural selection, has already demonstrated the vast power of emergence, more than any other known dynamic. Recently, more and more people have started to investigate this new frontier, log what they observe, and probe the furthest corners of this new form of life. Welcome to the incredible world of the Bibites. A Discord server named the Bibit Research Conglomerate has been at the forefront of Bibit experimentation and innovation. Originally formed to discuss the discovery of a stable predator-prey ecosystem by user Storm, this community-run server now tracks 35 unique research projects for over 200 participants. Making predation possible was a personal long-term goal. I even made a video detailing the difficulty and dynamics of its development. I thought it would take many additions to the simulation before it was possible, but Storm proved me wrong. They kept probing the dynamics of the simulation, testing hypotheses, and trying new things. In the end, they produced the first documented and well-researched proof of predation that evolved naturally and stabilized within an ecosystem, as visible through the very notable oscillations between the prey and predator populations. Storm's massive world had over 400 million square units of simulation area, with a very low biomass density. This created an expansive desert-like environment which produced slow herbivores who managed to traverse the map efficiently enough to conserve energy between the 4 pockets of food. Over time, scavengers evolved to feed on the carcasses of the herbivores that didn't quite make it to their next meal, just like vultures patrolling to find fallen grazers to feed on. Profiting from energy-dense meat, they survived and eventually thrived in that ecosystem. Ultimately, a lineage of scavengers learned to chase the herbivores and, with time, specialized to hunt them as their main source of sustenance. Since then, many others have managed to repeat this feat, proving that convergent evolution results in similar dynamics independently from the medium. Under similar conditions, we can expect analogous dynamics to evolve, whether it is with DNA and cells or with arrays of numbers and lines of code. This leaves us to wonder what other behaviors that we observe in biological life we will also see emerge in the Bibites as it keeps being worked on and increasing in complexity. User Fat Sauce has been hard at work investigating the development pathways of parasitism and how it is linked to predation. They have one of the longest running predator-prey systems, with more than 15,000 generations. They used that ecosystem to investigate the viability of parasite host systems and how to widen the evolutionary pathway to make it more likely to develop. This effort led to the successful emergence of stable parasitism within their simulation. Large herbivores were being latched on by smaller carnivorous bibites that fed from taking tiny bites of their host. Bigger individuals would often be covered by swarms of parasites, hindering their movement significantly. While in the beginning they would just feed on their host until they died, they eventually evolved regulation behaviors to try and not hurt their host unless necessary, keeping them alive for longer. In another branch of that simulation, the parasites eventually grew in size and reverted to predatorial behavior, showing that slight differences caused by simulation randomness can lead to profoundly different outcomes. This is one of the most thoroughly discussed projects on the research server, with close to 2,000 messages on that topic alone. It is honestly too much for me to completely cover, but there were an incredible amount of discoveries, insights, and side projects that sparked from this one alone. User 5 Balls of Hay investigated the effect of enclosed space on evolution in an impressively creative manner. The simulation allows user to tweak parameters of materials within the game. So, in the absence of rocks and walls, which will be added in a future version, they modified plants' properties until they were impossible to move or break. Additionally, they modified meat to replace plants as the default food source. This allowed them to design an environment with multiple enclosed spaces linked by narrow and long passages, making migration between the multiple open spaces exceedingly rare. With this environment, they were able to observe allopatric speciation, where two populations separated by geographic barriers genetically diverge over generations to better suit their different environments. In this simulation, those two separate populations diverged into two distinct genera. In the central enclosure, the purple Miliquanthus became dominant, while on the exterior, the blue Decay reigned supreme. Although they each started displaying unique behaviors and adaptations, both populations eventually exhibited an an unusual spitting behavior to propel them away from the walls that they could have otherwise easily got stuck to. This also likely helped them to navigate the cracks and crevices between the wall's pellets to colonize new areas, and must have been a pretty powerful adaptation. An extreme example of simulation diversity is displayed in an experiment by Chibity. They created an environment with several islands of fertility, each with different conditions and color selectors introduced in an earlier version. Over 3,000 hours of in-game time, they tweaked the simulation parameters to influence each populations into different evolutionary directions. At its most extreme, the simulation supported 8 different islands, each with a unique indigenous species that would occasionally venture from their original islands and compete with others in the sparsely fertile deserts centrally located between the islands. In this harsh desert, 40,000 generations after the first virgin Bibit was spawned, a predator emerged to prey on the unlucky island wanderers. This predator took a similar evolutionary path to the one seen in Storm's simulation, first scavenging on meat in the sparse plant environment, and eventually adapting to actively hunt. Chibity affectionately called this species a lancetfish, after these adorable creatures. The lancetfish existence was fragile and took several tries of balancing the simulation parameters before stabilizing. The ensuing arms race between the lancetfish and its prey accelerated the emergence of advanced hunting techniques and defensive behaviors. For instance, the lancetfish developed an effective rotating stalk and pounce technique that conserved energy when no preys were around, but quickly sprang into action when one was spotted by its keen and narrow vision. To protect themselves, the preys increased their defensive traits and started to bubble into clusters, providing the protection of numbers and impeding the movement of the larger lancetfish. If you hadn't noticed, the Bibites in this simulation have amazingly exotic forms. That is all thanks to the incredible skin mod that Chibity created and has shared with the community. To try this mod yourself and many others, check out the Discord. Within the community, others have chosen to take a more active approach in research, not wanting to wait for the imprecise results of evolution and preferring to play God by manually editing individual genes and brain structures to produce Bibites with intricately designed behaviors and test the limits of what the simulation even allows. Loops of nodes within the brain have proven to be particularly useful at preserving information and acting as an analog form of memory. From this, some users have created the basic processing blocks needed to establish Bibites as a Turing-complete system, meaning that they could theoretically implement any algorithm. This postulate led to a community challenge to create a Bibit that would compute and draw out the Fibonacci sequence with pheromones. Eventually, Incognito Man managed to design just that, using a complex management of the Bibit's internal clock to count steps, self-stimulating nodes as registers to store values, and adder logic to count the Fibonacci numbers. While the result is not perfect, it is an incredible testament of the vast possibilities offered by a Bibit's brain. In another thread, user Lucifer set out to design a Bibit species inspired by the behavior of ant colonies. They defined specific structures that would produce the desired behaviors. However, I did not manage to find if they ever actually implemented all of these clever designs into an actual Bibit. So, I decided to spend 2 full days manually crafting the brain and genes of a Bibit to materialize Lucifer's design and test how successful it would be in the real world. Just like an ant colonies have a queen, Bibit colonies would need one too, with workers at her service. Again, drawing inspiration from ants, they managed to cleverly use pheromones to achieve just that. A single mature queen would produce pheromones that identified it as such and would prevent other Bibits of that species from growing and developing into queens themselves. If workers spent enough time without sensing queen pheromones, they would eventually become one themselves and start a new colony. The queen is the only Bibit of a colony that would be able to lay eggs, producing workers whose main job is to bring her food. As soon as a worker is born, they would head out into the void, laying tracks of red pheromones and seeking food for their queen. As soon as they would manage to find some, they will grab as much as they can and start following back the red pheromones trail that they previously laid down, while instead now laying blue pheromones. That indicates there's food that way. Following the red trail eventually brings the worker back to their queen. They'll drop their pellets close to her and head back out. With this system, the workers will always have a shared pheromone network, where the red trails lead to the queen and blue trails lead to potential food areas. Because of the limited pheromone system of the Bibits, the red, green, and blue pheromones are the only possible. I'm planning to eventually allow for an infinite variety of pheromones types to evolve, but for now, that's the limitation. Since all queens use the same pheromones, workers have no way of telling which was their original. So if 2 queens settle not too far from each other's, workers will often end up switching allegiance randomly over each trip. In some cases, it will also happen that all workers desert a particular isolated queen in favor of another, and it will slowly starve, patiently waiting for workers that will never come. That whole system was clearly heavily inspired by this video by Pedz's work, which used a similar pheromone trail system to guide small agents to gather resources. But it is still incredible to me that the same logic implemented in actual life forms will be viable and allow them to survive and thrive. The research conglomerate has also served as an incubator for tools to better investigate the researchers' simulations and ecosystems. One of the first created being Storm's tool to detail the genetic distributions of Bibits populations inside a simulation. Another pretty active user, Quaris, made a complex Bibit DNA analyzer by combining Storm's work with other tools developed by the community that allows Bibit researchers to compare Bibits from multiple autosaves through time and track tendencies and evolutionary pressures. These tools are especially inspiring to me considering that I am currently working on the next update of the simulation, which will feature many similar graphs and analysis tools to track the dynamics of ecosystems. One example is the new lineage graph that tracks species of bibites, their relatedness, and their prevalence over time. It is currently available in the alpha releases of the simulation, which Patreon supporters have access to. So far, the feedback has been tremendous. I'm still working on adding more before the official 0.6 version release, but it's going to be an incredible improvement. In the ever-evolving world of the Bibites, it is not just the digital creatures that are growing. The community around this project is also flourishing, taking on a life of its own. The management team of the research conglomerate decided to throw an event and reached out. Without further ado, I present to you the Community Science Fair. This is not an official event, but it has been meticulously planned and promises to be fascinating, and I am in awe that the project has reached a point where the community is taking the initiative to create such events. The participants can present a submission into one of three categories: an experiment where you postulate a hypothesis, test it in a scientific manner, and conclude on the results with the data and analysis you produced. An innovation where, similarly to the impressive God-copying engineers we previously discussed, you produce or integrate a new behavior in the simulation through active modifications. And a study where you, study a particular simulation or dynamic of the simulation and report on it. I wholeheartedly encourage everyone interested to register. There is so much potential for discovery in the Bibites world, and this event is a fantastic opportunity to delve deeper. Just head to the dedicated room on the conglomerate server to learn more about participating. Science is at the heart of the Bibites, and the science fair is a celebration of that. If you are a student, the Bibites is a great tool to showcase the mechanics of evolution. You could even reuse your science fair submission for a school project. Contributing to the scientific community is something I am intensely passionate about. When I presented the Bibites at the Artificial Life Conference in 2020, I was overwhelmed by the positive feedback from the scientific community. Many researchers reached out to acknowledge the scientific merit of the project and tell me to publish scientific papers from. I hope to find the time to do so in the future, but for now, I am thrilled to see the community taking the lead and exploring the scientific potential of the Bibites. While it is astonishing to see all that this project has already accomplished, I want to continue pushing its growth to find the limits of what can be achieved. Over the past several months, I have been working with a long-time collaborator, Alex, to establish a game studio. I'm very happy to share that we have officially founded Omnia Studios, with the goal of accelerating the Bibites development. Under this partnership, we're launching the official Bibites website. It's going to be a hub for all things related to the project, from updates to links, including the Bibites merch store. Many of you have been asking for merch for a while, but I kept putting this off because I did not want it to be a soulless cash grab. But with the help of Brax and Chibity, two amazing artists and pillars of the community, we've come up with a few quality items that I hope you'll love as much as we do. All profits from the merge will go straight back into the project to fuel its future developments, so I hope it's a win-win for everyone. Check it out. The website is linked in the video description. This project is only possible thanks to the contribution and support of the community. We are very excited about the launch of the website and the merge store, and can't wait to hear your feedback. If you feel like a particular type of items is missing and should be added, let us know in the comments. I read all of them, every single one. I just don't reply. So as always, thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you next time.